Well, good day everybody. Welcome to a beautiful autumn day in Albuquerque. Since I have such a great day, I'm going to spend some time outside experimenting with this. This is the Pinholio pinhole camera. This is a self-developing pinhole camera. This was the camera created by Ethan Moses of Cameradactyl Cameras. I'm going to give this little guy a tryout today. Let's start on the back here. So it is composed of an inner body that has an opening, a square opening for a piece of photo paper or film that's just slightly less than 2.5 inches. It's like 2 7/16 roughly. That'll fit in there. And then the body of the camera has a gap between the inner part of the body and the outer part, and this is a light trap gap, and it enables you to fit the camera body together like that, and it makes a nice light trap. Now you might also notice there is an opening in the front and there is an internal shutter, right? So an internal shutter operates like that, and because of the machine screw that secures it in place, you cannot remove it completely. If you did that, you would fog the film with a gap of light here. This is the pinhole cap. It has some threads here that unscrews, revealing, of course, the opening where the shutter is. And then there is a pour spout, a plastic pour spout that you thread into place like that. Now, when you pull the shutter, the camera is now a developing tank. This permits you to pour liquids in here, the air will come out, and it permits you to develop your paper or film in the camera body itself without exposing it to light. There are some nice features, little details that I like about this camera. I like the knurling of this little texture on the edge of these front caps that gives you a good grip for removing it and putting it back into place. I like the profile of the pull shutter. There's just this little detail of the little groove here for your thumb, for your finger. It's just a nice touch. And then on the back of the camera, there are two little depressions for your fingers, so you can easily grip it and remove it and then reinstall it. Just a nicely designed camera. It's well thought out. Now, one of the cool things about this camera, when you're transporting it, when you don't have any film or paper in it, you can take the cap, whatever cap is you're not currently using, and you can store the cap, the other cap, inside the camera. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to have to do is to take the camera into the dark room, and I'm going to cut some square pieces of photo paper that are about 2 7/16 inches square. I'm going to cut a few of them so I'll have them ready for all the tests that we're doing. Well, this is the darkroom red light bulb in my darkroom over the door, and it sits right over the dry side of my darkroom, right over the cutting board. So I have some red light over the cutting board. So I have a piece of tape marked. This is the 5-inch mark for 4x5 paper. This is slightly less than 4 inches. This is like just the right width to fit into a 4x5 film holder. And this is our slightly less than 2.5 inches mark for putting the paper into the Pinholio pinhole camera. Okay, so let's talk about exposure here for a moment. Well, I took a meter reading out on my courtyard here just a while ago, and at ISO 12 for this grade 2 RC paper, it gave me a reading of 2 seconds at f90. Well, that's great, but the problem is the camera is f250. So I have to figure out a way of converting this exposure to something that'll work for the pinhole camera. And as it turns out, there's a pretty simple formula that you can use, which is if you take the focal ratio of your camera and divide it by the focal ratio that the meter recommended, and then if you square that value, multiply it by the exposure time that the meter recommended, that'll give you the exposure time you should use in your camera. So let's plug those numbers in. So we have an f250 camera. The meter said 90, 90. We're squaring it, we're multiplying it by the 2 seconds that the meter said. And to do the calculation today, yes, that's right, we're going to be using the TI 1200 calculator with the glorious red LEDs. Ah, yes, does this thing even work? Oh yeah, it does work. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so let's plug those numbers in. So clear, 250 divide by 90 equals, times equals to square it, and then times 2 is 15.4 seconds. We'll just call it 16 seconds, shall we? And oh, by the way, if you might notice these values here, the focal length of my camera is never going to really change as long as I keep the same pinhole. So the 250 doesn't change. And as long as I meter my scene and take a reading at f90, the 90 doesn't change. And so as it turns out, this term right here ends up being a constant. And it's going to be 7.72 for this particular combination of this camera and using this meter at f90. So for this camera, I have this x value, this constant of 7.72. All I have to do is multiply that by whatever time the light meter recommends, and that'll give me my exposure time in the camera. One issue with cameras like the Pinholio camera is it doesn't have its own tripod bushing, and so what I've done over the years is I've made a number of different little plates like this, wooden plates. This is one of the smallest ones I have. I just grabbed it off my workbench. So just a simple scrap piece of wood with a 1/4-20 blind nut mounted in it, and I have a couple cup hooks here that I can attach a rubber band to. So I'm going to be using a really short tripod. I'm going to use a low to the ground shot in my courtyard here. So this is a little Ultrapod 2 little tabletop tripod. We'll go ahead and just mount the plate like so. This is one of the things I really enjoy about pinhole photography is there's a certain degree of whimsy that you can employ when you're setting up your compositions, because the camera can focus is pretty darn close, closer than most glass lenses. So it's fun kind of setting up these little imaginary scenes, and you can play with a sense of scale and depth because you can get very near ground and the far ground equally sort of focused. Well, this is my little scene. I have this little metal garden ornament. We call it a brass rat. Anyways, just got some little rocks and things like that here on the side of the porch. I'm going to set the camera up. I'm going to probably give it about 20 seconds, just so I can make sure I get sufficient exposure here. Get ready. Make sure that your shadow doesn't get in the picture unless you want it to be in the picture, and don't move around too much if you're on soft ground because it might move the camera. So another 5 seconds. All right, let's go develop it. It helps to open up the back of the camera slightly to get a little bit of air in there so you won't get a vacuum lock. And then when you're pouring the chemicals out, you want to pour it on the opposite side from the dark slide, like that. Okay. Hey. This is where a toothpick comes in handy. Let's see here. Ooh, I think I composed it pretty good. So that looks pretty good. There's the brass rat right here, and I got some shadows here, highlights here, and it looks like the highlights, like the brightest part is this rock, and it's not super blown out. There's still a little bit of detail in there. So that looks pretty cool. I'm going to have to make a positive inversion of this and see what it looks like as a finished image, but not bad at all. Well, okay, I was happy about that first exposure. That was ISO 12, and that was RC grade 2. So the next exposure, I think I want to try Harman Direct Positive paper, but I first have to dry out the camera. It's all wet inside, alas. Okay, so I've cleaned up, dried up the camera, and I put back the pinhole cap on it to it, like that. Okay, so Harman Direct Positive paper. Well, I happen to have some pieces of Harman Direct Positive paper that I trimmed back in February of 2019 and I stored them in this storage box. These are trimmed to 2 5/8 inch. I was using these in my twin lens reflex Yashica Matte LM camera, so I just need to trim off about probably a 1/4 inch on each horizontally and vertically to get them to fit in the camera here. So I usually rate Harman Direct Positive paper lower than the grade 2 RC paper. Grade 2 RC paper, about ISO 12. Harman, it depends on if it's fall or winter, how much UV and blue light's in the air. It's a pretty bright day still. I'm going to rate it about ISO 3. The focal ratio of the camera is 250. The focal ratio of my meter is f90 squared times the recommended time of 8 seconds on my light meter. And we'll calculate that here on the wonderfully antique Sharp LC-Mate calculator. Is 61.7, call it 62 seconds. About a minute exposure, roughly what we've calculated before for ISO 3. So here we go. All right. Just gotta wait for it. Okay. There we are. All right, let's go process this. Let's see what we got here. Well, that's pretty cool. I got some nice dark shadows, highlights. Yeah, I think the exposure came out good, and the developing came out okay. The promise that this camera design has that I'm excited about is a little miniature handheld version of an Afghan box camera. That's really where I think this is headed. If you can do the developing part easily enough, pouring the chemicals in and out without spills, this is going to really be a fun process. And you could do it not only with the black and white peroxide citric acid reversal process, but I think we could probably do it with the RA4 color print paper reversal process that I showed you in one of the previous videos. You know, I had been thinking about, for a long time, I've been thinking about modifying a stainless steel 35 millimeter developing tank to make it into a pinhole camera / developing tank. But it would entail drilling a hole through the side of the tank and rigging up a pinhole aperture on the side, and then figuring out how to keep that aperture from getting wet and getting chemicals in your metal pinhole. So I like Ethan's design. His idea of an internal shutter and being able to replace the pinhole plate with the pour spout is a great idea, and just needs a little bit of improvement, some engineering improvements. I think it's going to be a great product. Well, it's a few hours later. I've had opportunity to wash and dry these pieces. So first of all, we have the paper negative itself. Now I've gone ahead and photographed these just with my iPhone, and in the case of the paper negative, I've made a quick inversion using FilterStorm, the FilterStorm app. So this is a pretty cool image, and despite the harsh sunlight out there today, it really was a pretty good tonal range, I thought, in this picture. The brightest part of the scene is just about blown out, and the shadow details are still evident, which is pretty cool. Okay, the next image is going to be the one done on Harman Direct Positive paper. Now, this one I had to use Fresher Developer. So I do with paper negatives is typically use a dilute used developer I've used previously, and I develop it by inspection, usually until it's complete or until the tonal range looks good. In this case, you can't really develop by inspection because you're developing it inside of a tank. You can't see it. But this Harman print I thought was pretty cool. It has its own particular qualities about it. It has a nice contrasty look to it, yet the shadows are evident and the highlights are pretty nice. It has a nice tone to it, really does. And it might be hard for you to tell from the simple cell phone photo that I took of it, but in the hand, looking at it right up close, they look really sharp. Like the oval grid-like shadow above the head of the brass rat. That looks really crisp in this little print. From a reading distance, it looks pretty neat. And the texture of the stucco wall in the upper left corner, that looks nice and sharp too. Now, of course, if you photograph this on a cell phone and blow it up to the size of a computer screen, it probably doesn't look as sharp, but it looks amazingly sharp at this scale for a pinhole picture. And that's what I really love about these small size direct positive prints. Well, I think we've shown here that Ethan's Pinholio camera really does work as a great pinhole camera. There are some improvements, I think, to be made to the pour spout for developing it, but it's a neat product, and I look forward to seeing the improvements that he might bring about this product in the future. If you guys got any questions, concerns, ideas, or anything, drop a note down below. I really appreciate it, and I'll try to get back to you and answer your questions if you have any. And until next time, of course, as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.